Well, then let's talk about what to write or what you're writing when you don't know what you're writing. Hi, everyone. My name is Joe Weinberg. I am going to come up here and talk for this. I am getting a sign saying my, never mind. I was getting something saying my connection was bad, but it's not. So this is a guide for pantsers. So I guess the first thing I should do probably is talk about the difference between a plotter and a pantser. Plotter is somebody who plans things out, who has maybe a diagram, maybe an outline, has something planned so they know what they're going to write when they sit down and start writing. And a pantser flies by the seat of their pants, often with no idea. It's a much more access to the subconscious kind of writing. It's something, the idea for this came up because I realized this year, talking to my therapist, that a number of times we figure out what's going on in my head and what I'm worried about by what kinds of things keep occurring in what I'm writing. What sort of themes will keep showing up, what sort of situations show up, what shows into things. And I realized that I'm probably not the only one who does this. It might happen for people who are plotters, but I'm not one of you, so I don't understand how you think. I've tried it. I'm going to keep trying, but for now, I'm firmly in the pantser camp. But at the core, what really matters is whenever you're writing, you're always writing about something. Those gears are turning, things are going on. You are saying something of import, not just to you and hopefully not just to your audience, but sometimes something that's important that you're not even aware that you're saying. Sometimes we don't know what it is we're writing about when we start writing, and we just sit down and start putting out, typing out the words or writing them by hand or however it is that you do it. And it's okay to that's in a lot of ways kind of the essence of writing for some people. I know for me, writing a story is as much at me reading it as it is me figuring out what's going to happen next. I have to read what I'm writing while I do it in order to know what just happened, to let alone to know what happens next. I oftentimes have no idea what's going to happen next in my stories, and that's why I'm told, people say that it's really hard to predict the things that I write. Because if you predict it, maybe you know more than I do. Oh, my audio cut off for 10 seconds. Am I back? What did I miss? Okay, hopefully I'm back now. I am back. Stories taking on a life of their own. Yeah, exactly. When you're writing and you're writing from just within we don't know where they are, and it really does feel like take a life of their own. Sometimes the characters will have their own desires and the things that they want to do, and they may not be what you're planning. But that's okay. That's part of the process. So what you need to do when you're trying to figure out what it is that you're writing about is you need to look at the things that seem to keep happening again and again. What are the recurring themes? What subject matter seems important? So if you have your characters that are all sitting around in a room waiting for something to happen, but they're all talking about death and immortality, maybe that's the point of what it is you're trying to write. Maybe that's what you're thinking about and what's being processed in the background of your mind. And so that's what you're saying while you do all of these things. A lot of times figuring this out and stopping and saying, okay, so what am I actually writing about is how you know what comes next. You start to pump out a couple of thousand words, and all of a sudden, there you are with a story well on its way, well structured. Cut off at you start, back now. Always something. You start writing a story and you get a bunch of it out, and you're then stuck because you don't know what it is you're supposed to say next. You don't know what's going to come up next. And a lot of times stopping and looking at what you've already written is a way to do that. And I don't mean going back and reading it with the idea of editing what you're going to say. I mean looking at it to see what is going on in the story that you didn't necessarily put there intentionally. A lot of times when you're doing it, when you're writing something, the story is just coming out of you. I'm continuing along with what may or may not be the real point of the story. You may find out when you go back through and read it that there's something else that is the actual point of the story. Part of the other reason I bring this up is I try and do Nano every year. It's National Novel Writing Month. And this year, when I was going to do it, I kept thinking, all right, well, what do I want to write about? And I'll try and plan things out, and I'll maybe sketch out something and do the closest I ever come to being a plotter, which is to make a page of notes and whatever. And I found out that I couldn't do it. My brain wouldn't let me. It was very insistent that I go into this completely by the seat of my pants. So even to the point where the only thing it would let me start with was the great line, "It was a dark and stormy night." And so I had all these characters who, for some reason, is a werewolf hunter. This person who, for some reason, is works for Anubis. This person who is a demon, and this person who is the personification of death. Why are they all in this one bar at the same time? And I realized that all of the different conversations were talking about death and immortality and the value of life. And as I was going along and writing and having all these different perspectives from all these different creatures, talking about when their life makes an impact, what it means when you're gone, and whether mortality or immortality has any real impact on who you are as a person. And eventually realized that the whole story was about trying to decide whether or not immortality, true immortality, should be a thing. In our world. All that through pretty quickly. Oh, that's good to know. When it cuts off, it picks up where I left off. That would be really convenient. That would mean that you guys aren't just missing half of what I'm saying. If you are just missing half of what I'm saying, let me promise you the half that you're missing is brilliant. Just absolute genius. The part that you're not missing is the stuff to make it more accessible and average. Oh, dark and stormy night. Okay. Another thing that I noticed as a recurring theme in the things that I wrote is I was constantly looking at how money is made up. I wrote 4 different lit RPG novels, every single one of which had at some point the character trying to figure out how the money exchange rate would be for money in the real world. And rather than realizing that what that meant was that the money systems I was making up weren't very good, it was more that money itself is just made up, that it can be anything that it wants. One story that I wrote, I had a bunch of characters that were just dealing with their sudden change in lifestyle because now they were suddenly no longer human. And I realized that a big part of what I was talking about wasn't about humanity, it was about disability. That because they no longer qualify as human, there are certain things they can no longer do. This one in particular was about werewolves. And so one of the characters was a pediatric surgeon. And all of a sudden, nobody trusted him to be around kids and blood because he turned into a giant slavery mob. I'll explain that part. But I realized because this sort of thing kept coming up, that that's really what I was talking about. And it's a way of kind of getting at the themes in what's that and what it is you're writing. And I noticed that you can do it with a lot of other people too. You can almost psychoanalyze a writer by the things that they write. And I know that sounds kind of obvious, but I don't mean literally like, oh yeah, Stephen King's a serial killer. But in the sense of, Stephen King wrote Misery about his battle with alcoholism. We all write about things that are about more than what actually appears on the page. And so when you are doing that and when you're trying to figure out what it is that you're saying, the key thing is really to figure out what it is that you keep mentioning and keep going back to, because that's how you know what's going to come next and what else there is to say. Sometimes when we're flying by the seat of our pants, we have no idea what's going to come out next. And a lot of times that's part of the fun. You know, part of the joy is sitting down and saying, I wonder what's going to happen today. You know, and whether you're doing a Raymond Chandler and having somebody burst in the door with a gun whenever you get stuck, or you have things that seem more meticulously plotted, a lot of times you can figure out what a story is really about by looking at the themes that keep recurring. Now I feel like I'm being redundant and want to just talk about the pictures that I chose, like this one from it's the Mad Hatter. But in both of those cases, the image is there for a reason. The reason I chose Plato is because most of Platonic dialogues are essentially people talking around in circles trying to figure out what it is they're actually talking about. It's Socrates, often cheating, who is, you know, in the Meno talking about memory and how all of the things that we know are actually things that we just remember, and how in the Phaedrus he's talking about how memory is being destroyed by this newfangled technology called the written word. And you get to see a lot of the things that the real Socrates was probably worried about, or the real Plato at least was worried about when he was writing these things, and the things that he cared about, because a lot of these dialogues seem like they're conversations. That's why they were dialogues. And then, of course, with the Mad Hatter, it's all about the pedantic wordplay and figuring out what things mean and saying where things go in one place or another. A reason for picking these pictures. But I would love to hear what you guys think. What are your thoughts on the things that you write about? What do you write about when you don't know what you're doing? At what point do you stop and say, all right, what the hell is this novel about? Anybody? I feel like I overcorrected for Mallory. She was trying to cram so much things down so that it would be a much more direct and specific thing. And now I've only been talking for 10 minutes. Usually ask that question multiple times, you're right. Okay. Do you ever answer it though? Because I don't always. A lot of times I won't realize what a story was really about until long after it's written, sometimes not until after it's been published. But I found that this new thing that I'm doing, new to me, of stopping and actually asking what it's about really helps me pull everything together at the end. I do answer it sometimes. The trouble is I lose track of the story as the idea continues to grow. That is something that is dangerous. Do you answer it within the story, the context of the story, or do you just answer it to yourself? Because if you try and answer it in the context of the story, then I can see that definitely start to get away from you. Or no, the story continues to grow, and so you lose track of the ideas. That's okay too. You know, you're allowed to lose track of ideas. You're allowed to have people disappear, or characters that don't end up going where you want them to. I had a character in one of the last stories that I wrote who was intended to be the main villain, and then he ended up just kind of showing up for half a dozen chapters, being kind of a jerk, and then disappearing. And my other characters were like, yeah, we don't want to deal with him anymore. And so they just went off on their own. against myself, trying to help me guide the growth of the story just morphs uncontrollably. Yeah, goes where you don't plan it to go. I think that's the key benefit of being a pantser, is that the stories will morph and go where you don't want them to go and where you don't intend them to go. Sometimes marketing. So don't take my advice for that, but take my advice as far as the actual writing goes. Let it go different places. Let the story take you wherever it wants to go. You never know what kinds of things you're going to run into if you do that. I always feel like that's the major flaw that plotters have, is that they cut off all of those different directions of creativity that we pantsers get to do, where we start asking these questions and let the story morph uncontrollably and go wherever it is it wants to go. Plotters don't really get to do that because they have this whole structure thing that lets them start focusing down telling them to actually pay. I just know that I've never been able to do more than a single page of notes for plotting any kind of story, no matter how long. And the longest stories that I've written never have anything planned. I tend to look at my writing as I sit down on a blank page and there's just an empty stage. Character walks on stage and just starts doing stuff. And I play catch up for the rest of the book, trying to figure out what they're doing and why. And that works for me, but I don't know if it'll work for everybody. And I don't know what the difference is for people who are more of the plotters than pantsers. I feel like that would have been a good panel to have. One plotter and one pantser to sit there and just argue about the right way to do things. Might get violent, so that might not be good. But yeah, it would definitely be interesting to see. Mostly, I think it would be interesting because you get to hear from the inside both perspectives. Because anytime you talk to somebody about plotter and pantser, they're one or the other. I've never met anybody who does both, or at least not anybody who has no preference over the two. So it would be interesting to be able to get the conflicting perspectives of why they choose to do things a certain way, and whether or not there really is that creative jump in plotting that you get in pantsing, where you start off going through and asking yourself these questions and then answering them and finding out that the story is about something completely different from what you intended. I don't know. That'd be an interesting thing to see. Probably take somebody much smarter than me to figure that out. Oh, new message. A plotster. General idea of what I want to do, and then just let the words fall out. See, I think that qualifies Samantha as a pantser. Because having a general, I don't know, it depends on what you mean by how general of an idea you have. If you're saying, like, I have a general idea in the sense of, I'm going to write a horror story about a haunted house. So here are my characters and go. That I think still counts as pantsing. If you're planning on doing, I'm going to do a haunted house story, and in Act 1, I'm going to have people starting to see things and not sure what's going on. In Act 2, then I'll have people becoming more and more certain that what's going on is actually supernatural. And then in Act 3, I'm going to start killing everybody. Then I think maybe you're more of a plotter, even though that could still be just done on one page of plotting. So I don't know. I like the term plotster, though. But I think that would be the other value of being able to see from both sides, because maybe plotters for pantser, maybe plotters think that pantsers just literally sit down and have no idea what's going to come. And while that is sometimes true, a lot of times there's at least a genre in play. or a starting circumstance where you have at least the general idea of what's going to come next. Even if you don't necessarily know how you're going to get there, you might have a story that you know the ending. In the Sam Archer novels that I wrote, I have a lot of things happening in multiple timelines. And I do it with a kind of Law and Order style, you know, Tuesday, 7:31 p.m., blah, blah, blah. And that allows me to have things in the different time periods. And sometimes I will write something that hasn't happened yet, but is like a major climactic moment, and then cut to the past and have to figure out how to get there in the spirit of things. Ooh, what did Hannah say? Hannah says, I'm an extremely organized person, but after becoming a writer, I don't like the plot storylines or worlds out beforehand because it restricts the spirit of writing for me personally. I admire plotters' detailed maps and charts, but my brain prefers to let the chaos unfold and organize later. Yeah, exactly, Hannah. Letting the chaos unfold and organize it later is, oddly enough, what I'll be talking about tomorrow. When I'm talking about how to make it all look like it was on purpose in the second draft. Because I'm like you. I want the very basics of where it goes, and then let the spirit write for me. And it does sometimes feel like I can understand why the ancient Greeks thought that there were actual beings of the muses who would come and tell you the stories and inspire people. Because a lot of times with writing, it does feel like you're recording what somebody else is saying to you, that you are just transcribing the words of the muse. And I feel like you get that a lot with the chaos and the spirit of writing, as Hannah said. I envy you, though, Hannah, mostly because you're an extremely organized person. And I am not at all. I've had people ask me reading the stories. I love symbolism is an underlying message. No intention. Yeah, and so Hannah, you just said that people will think that you put a bunch of symbolism and underlying message in there intentionally, but it really comes out naturally, and that's exactly what I'm talking about here. I guess in a way, what this whole talk is about is a way of dealing with the writer's block, because this is a way where if you're stuck, you can go back and figure out that symbolism and underlying message that other people are going to see later that you didn't put in intentionally. It just kind of fell in there from the spirit of writing. And now you get to go and see, okay, what were they? And when you identify them, it becomes much easier to enhance them and show them more and reference them and re-reference them as time goes by. But yeah, I used to have this big theory, actually this in high school once. I had this whole theory that all of the stuff that they say about the underlying message and the symbolism and the deep level metaphors and all that, I used to think that those were all just made up by English teachers and that the writers never intended any of that. And I did an experiment one time where I wrote a short story and gave it to the teacher, and the teacher shared it with the class and didn't tell them that I had written it. She presented it to them as if it was some other writer that they had found. And then we went and asked about all the symbolism and did all the analysis and all that kind of stuff. And then afterwards, after it was all done, I got to say, yeah, I didn't intend any of that. I was just writing a story. Oh, Xavier, that is interesting. Disorganized person when it comes to stories like that, build structure into my world, 40-page outline, character profiles, timelines, et cetera, et cetera. That's awesome and interesting that one of you identifies as organized but a pantser, and the other identifies as disorganized but a plotter. I wonder how often those two match up. I mean, it's obviously not all the time because I'm disorganized and a pantser. But that's really fascinating. Yeah, if we could identify an organized plotter, we'd have all four. The four of us combined could, I don't know, write stories in an anthology, maybe. There was an anthology of short murder mysteries, I think, called A Thick Book, A Thick Fog, and A Thick Steak. And it was all these different writers, and they all had to write a story, and all the stories had to include those three elements. And I've always wanted to do stuff like that with people. And I thought that would be a fun way to, if nothing else, demonstrate how much ideas don't matter. Yeah. All write a story using the same general idea and direction and see how different they turn out. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Ideas are free. That's one of the things about writing. You can't steal an idea. You can only steal its execution. And if we got 4 people, one organized pantser, one organized plotter, one disorganized pantser, and one disorganized plotter, we could have an interesting set of 4 stories. So yeah, that's when you don't know what you're writing about. I hope this has been helpful. Thank you guys so much for the conversation and for keeping me from only talking for 15 minutes. Thank you. And I will be seeing you. I'll be around. Feel free to come up and chat with me anytime. I'm not great at starting conversations, but I do love to talk to people. So I'll be around. Feel free to talk to me. Bye-bye, everybody.